Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Vina, host of the SmartTechCheck podcast. Today is Monday, March 31st, 2025. Today, I'm joined by a wonderful analyst, Jack Gold, the founder and principal analyst at J. Gold Associates. He's been on my podcast before, but today's a big deal, very, very big deal in tech. LBT, as we know, the new CEO of Intel, gave his first keynote at Compact's Intel Vision, which sounds like a television channel, but their meeting is in downtown Las Vegas. He's only been on the job for about 14 days, which he did actually make a remark about. But Jack, you had a front seat to all the action. Jack, how did he do?
Mixed review, in my opinion. I mean, look, he's only been here for 2 weeks, so you can't expect him to know everything about everything at Intel. It's a monster corporation. But what he did do, which I thought was good, was give people a sense for what he was thinking. You know, he's very much focused on believing that Intel has a path back. A path back to industry dominance is where he wants to take it. He spent a lot of time looking at new technologies, emerging technologies in different areas when he was both at Cadence, but also in his VC work. He was a VC for many years as well. I think he said all the right words. If people expected him to stand up and say, this is what we're going to do to Foundry, this is what we're going to do to chips, this is what we're going to do to blah, 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 blah. You know, he hasn't had enough time to do that.
No, but he was smart enough to step up and say that, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah. He also was humble enough to say, look, I don't have all the answers. And I also know that if I'm going to get all the answers, I have to go deep into the organization. I'm not just going to talk to the managers. I'm going to go down 6-7 layers into the engineers, and I'm willing to talk to anybody. It's not, you're not coming up to the ivory tower. I'm going down to you guys. And I thought that was very refreshing.
Yes. And I was actually really gratified by that, because I think, very often, and Intel has this problem, as you know, there's layers of management there that even after all the cuts have been there for years. I don't think it's unfair to say they've had kind of a bit of a survivor mentality there. And, you don't want to surround yourself with people who are going to, say self-preservation like things. And I get the feeling that he realizes he has to cut through the BS, and he does have to deep dive. And, he made a remark that, he's by education, he's a nuclear trained scientist, which actually impressed me quite a bit. That is not a trivial background for someone to ascend to the throne, so to speak, at Intel. But I was impressed with the fact that he knows he's going to have to he doesn't have all the answers now. He's only been on the job for a couple of weeks,
right?
Frankly. But I do think, but he did say there were some code words that he said, hey, we're going to have to, and this is not words, I'm not going to quote the sentence exactly, but something along the line that, non-essential businesses or not core are going to have to go. And now it also depends, Jack, and I want to get your perspective. What is non-core versus core? And so what was your reaction to that particular comment?
Yeah, not surprising. Look, they're going to have to downsize some stuff for sure. Any organization the size of Intel has stuff that is non-core, right? And when you're making lots of money, if you're Google minting money, you can invest in a lot of this stuff, like their Waymo and, all the stuff, the clone stuff and, just all kinds of stuff. Intel is not at that point right now. They've already gotten rid of the investment arm, right? The Intel VC guys, not gotten rid of, but spun out. So it's not like they just, drove them under the bus. But there's going to be other stuff like that that's on the periphery that's maybe making, not a whole lot of money for them, that isn't core to their future. One of the things that I think he's very focused on is not just what they're doing today, but where they need to be in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years out. And that's refreshing because over the last few years, Intel seemed to be more focused on how do I compete with, all that stuff that's biting me in the butt, all the alligators draining the swamp, as opposed to let's go to the next step. What's the next phase? Where can we lead where the next phase is going? Is it quantum? Is it the next generation of AI? Is it, who knows, neuromorphic, whatever it's going to be, that's where they have to focus. And I think that's smart on his part.
Well, when you think about some of the things that, clearly, for example, good, better, and different. I mean, Intel has kind of missed the AI thing,
Yeah.
and that's well known. But he didn't, and obviously he can't ignore AI. He's going to have to embrace it in a pretty vigorous way. But he also said, and tell me if I misunderstood what the statement he made, that I think he saw AI as a very powerful operational tool to help them become more efficient. Which, by the way, AI helps out a lot about that. But it seemed to suggest that, we obviously have to kind of craft our roadmap and become much more aggressive about incorporating AI as part of our DNA, like another company has done in Santa Clara. But do it in a way that, hey, we can also benefit from this technology internally by right-sizing the operation. Did you get that impression?
Yeah, a couple of things around AI. Number one is, I think he really strongly believes that, and I think management, not just him, but I think most management believes that trying to go head-to-head with NVIDIA is not a winning strategy for them. Now, they're not going to outdo, Blackwell in the short term, or Rubin or whatever's coming next. It's just too hard. But AI is going to expand dramatically, and it's going to expand dramatically in multiple directions. It's going to expand at the edge, at the personal edge. It's going to expand into machine tools and machines and robotics and all that kind of stuff. And that's where they can actually make some significant inroads. Yeah. x86 is really a legacy that anybody would pay gazillions of dollars to have. There's software out there, there's chips out there, there's design expertise out there. And while they're not going to be able to push x86 necessarily against NVIDIA directly at the high end, when you start talking about inference, when you start talking about small systems, take an Intel Core chip that's in a PC and put that into a small localized edge system, and you got something. And I think that's where they're going to focus longer term. Now, today, that's not a lot of money.
Right.
But 3 years from now, it could very well be.
No, I agree with you. I think that for them to say, hey, we're going to go after NVIDIA, first of all, that would not be a credible statement, kind of where they are right now. Right. Number two is their market share in the AI space, in that specific part of the AI data center space. They're just, getting their butt handed to them. And we all know that. But I guess the question I have for you, the big, gorilla in the room is really the foundry stuff. Now, he seemed to suggest that he believes that Intel has to be in the foundry business. Now, and it would not be completely inconsistent, by the way, if he did that and they spun that business off, but there was still some type of connection between the master corporate company and the foundry itself. Maybe a lot more diluted than it is right now, obviously, because right now they're very tightly integrated. And you and I have chatted about this before. I just think that the foundry business, if you look at it over a 40 or 50-year continuum, has come so far that the expertise, the discipline, the skills to have a operationally sound foundry business is much more fundamental today than it was, again, decades ago. And that's why operations like TSMC and others, the small handful that actually, just they're really focused on building the chips, have done such a nice job because they're really best in class at that, So again, I know it's, kind of reading the tea leaves, but if you had to guess right now, where do you this is going? From
I don't think, sorry. I don't think at this point that he wants to get rid of the foundry. And frankly, I think it would be a mistake at this point for him to get rid of the foundry for a lot of reasons. One, who would buy it? That's almost a different issue. But two, it does give Intel a significant advantage in the marketplace if, it's a big if, right? Yep. If they can make the foundry truly competitive with TSMC, and not just TSMC, others out there. I mean, there's a bunch of foundries, and there's a bunch of them coming up in China too, which is also troubling. So if you can make them, if you can make it come back, and Pat Gelsinger was on a path to do that. I believe, given another year or two, that Intel Foundry would have been competitive in the marketplace. Mm-hmm. Now, what the gotcha is in that space is not just, can I have a fab and a process that is competitive, but can I find external customers that trust me enough to come in and want me to build volume products for them.
Right.
And that's where the trick is right now. They've got to go out and find it. Now they've announced some, right? They're working with Microsoft, they're working with AWS. Those certainly aren't trivial. They would love to get a Qualcomm or an Apple or, somebody like that. And I'm sure they're talking. It's a work in progress. But that's what it's going to take to really turn the foundry around. I think they've got the process in reasonable enough shape for people to take that risk, with 18A and 14 coming on as well in the next year. But we'll see. I mean, they've got to get the yields up. They've got to make a profit. It's not just being able to produce a couple of chips here. They got to do it in volume and to meet customer demand. And that's been the problem in the past. So I think he's going to give them, my guess, he's going to give them a year or two to work this stuff out and then reevaluate if it doesn't.
Now, here's the real, because I really do value your opinion, is that, he used the phrase again at the beginning of the keynote that we're going to double down on innovation, which sounds like a great thing to say.
Sure.
But innovation implies that, you can innovate on something, and depends how you define what innovation is. Many companies, the way Dell defines innovation is entirely different from how other companies define innovation. And I don't mean in a bad way for Dell, but it's, different, it's apples and oranges. But when you innovate, and especially if you define innovation by going into new markets, you sometimes are going to make a mistake, or that you didn't make the bet the right way. And I just, when I look back at Intel over the last 20 years, let's just start at 2007 with the birth of the modern smartphone with Apple. They missed that migration to low power chips. They missed the MP3 market. They missed the tablet market. I mean, there's 4 or 5 those are big market categories.
Yeah.
The Intel behavior was very much, play it safe. It's almost like, and let's face it, call it up to 2018, 2019, they were like a football team that was up by 25 points in the fourth quarter. Why screw up with things?
Right.
Do you think he can break that mindset that they have to be conservative of everything? Because I think you have to do that. You got to have to take some chances. And what will it require from a culture standpoint?
Look, I think they have to get back to what Intel was in the early days. In the early days, Intel was incredibly innovative. For the first 20 whatever years of their existence, they produced all kinds of stuff that no one else could do, right? And then they got complacent. They got big. They were a public company. They were looking at the bottom line. They were worried about quarter to quarter profits to keep the stock up. Blah 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 blah. A lot of companies go that road. It's not just Intel, right? We've seen that a lot. What they have to do is they need to figure out that, hey, okay, maybe our stock takes the hit if we don't make as much profit as we could have, by let's be honest, milking some of this stuff, because that's what they did. They cut back on investments when they shouldn't have. But I really think that new management, not just LBT. It shouldn't be that hard to pronounce. My apologies. Liputan. I think he knows that. I mean, look at his past record, both at Cadence and also in his VC world. He was always looking for new technologies. And I think the management around him has gotten to the point where they are doing that too. Certainly not everyone. There's going to be sometimes in a large corporation that's been around for a long time, you're going to find people that are complacent and they don't want to change.
Right.
Those are the folks that they have to move on. And so I think the innovation has come back. Look, we've seen it in the foundry. Honestly, considering the process they made in the last 3 years, that's probably more progress than they made in the last 10.
Right.
So I think it's there. I think what he's going to do is, light a fire under people's butts and say, go make it happen. I don't want to hear any excuses.
Right.
And Pat Gelsinger was starting to do that. I think they just physically didn't give him enough time to do it.
Right. Well, and let's face it. I mean, it's a Harvard business case study ready to be written, in that when you had the kind of market share they had in the 90s and 2000s, you start to play it safe. And it turned into a kind of a dual-edged sword, because, your share is so high. Why, if it ain't broke, why fix it? And that was very much an Intel thing. So, it's kind of a lesson for big companies because it's really hard to be, to be really aggressive when you have such a commanding position in the marketplace. And let's face it, it's not like their market share in the PC space right now is at 15%. I mean, they still have very significant market share that any other company would kill themselves for. So I do think that I was, again, I'm gratified by some of the things I heard. Let's face it, he's only been on the job for 2 weeks, so what do you expect to hear? But before we kind of wrap this up, as we kind of wind down, have you heard any post reaction after the keynote? Were there any? I think there were some other presentations that they didn't stream. Did you hear anything that kind of jumped out? You saying, "Oh, that's interesting."
Well, so I think, and I was kind of listening during the keynote to some of the folks that were, now remember, most of the folks that are in the audience are partners, right? And they want them to succeed. But a couple of comments I heard around, they really liked hearing the honesty coming from him.
Yes.
The fact that he was humble and that, he knew that there were issues and he was going to try and solve them. So I think that's a big step forward. They can get a lot of feedback from their client base about what they should be doing and how they should be doing it and where the market's going. And I think they're going to start listening. In the past, they didn't always listen. I think there's going to be, kind of an open platform now that wasn't there before. And I think that's good. And frankly, Lip Bhutan has a lot of contacts in the industry that aren't bad. He's going to get a lot of input from people.
Yeah. No, I agree. No, there's going to be no shortage of feedback.
Right.
And I do think his customers, because, hey, listen, I spent between Compaq and Dell 16 years on the customer side, and that was during a period where Intel could be extremely arrogant.
Right.
It was not fun.
Right.
Dealing with them, and but that's another podcast. Why don't we just kind of wrap it up there, Jack? Because I know you're waiting to go to dinner, and I don't want to hold you up there. But again, to everyone, thanks for taking the time to join me for today's podcast. For our viewing and listening audience, please make sure the Smart Tech Check podcast is part of your daily commute. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe buttons at the end of today's podcast, or use these on-screen QR codes to connect with me. You can also follow me on X at Mark Vina Tech Guy. And again, thanks very much, Jack. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure.